Welcome back to Norman Island Live. I'm Lewis Aaron. Apologies for the technical delays. I take full responsibility. Now, I know you're used to seeing the platinum blonde locks of hair from Curtis Daly, but today you're stuck with me. But he could never be far away from the camera, itching to dive into the news. My special guest today is the one and only Curtis Daly. Are you not going to give yourself one day off?
No, listen, us socialists have got to keep fighting for a better world. And also, because I loves it, I do. But you know what? The hosting chair really suits you. I think we should be doing this more often.
Oh, we'll see. Well, after the technical issues of today, which are all my fault, we'll have to see. Okay, so we'll go on straight to our first story of today. Apologies, a little summary. So we have the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan, is urging the International Criminal Court to hurry with the arrest warrants for Israelis and the Hamas leaders. The UK General Attorney has stepped in on the arms sales to Israel, and there's more economic pain for the UK under Labour, and also Labour might be stopping its members from choosing the leader of the Labour Party. Let's start with the first story. So you'll remember in May that the British ICC prosecutor, who was democratically elected and nominated by the UK, Karim Khan, filed an application for arrest warrants for the Israeli senior leadership and Hamas senior leadership too for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Well, obviously, he's become very frustrated as he's urged the court to hurry up in its decision, as he's called for the ICC to hurry up. Any unjustified delay in these proceedings detrimentally affects the rights and victims, he said. It is settled law that the court has jurisdiction in this situation, dismissing legal arguments based on provisions in the Oslo Accords and the assertions by Israel that it is carrying out its own investigations into the alleged war crimes. That was reported on by Reuters. Well, we know in the past that the US and Israel have interfered with the ICC, with the Trump administration actually sanctioning the previous ICC prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda. Bensouda also reported that Israeli officials have turned up at her home, even followed her to hotels, spied on her and the cases she's working on to try and subvert the ICC and its processes. Well, we know the reasons why Karim Khan is becoming so impatient. He's fed up of the interference too, the phony legal challenges from Germany, Hungary, and the USA. They're trying to argue that the ICC does not have jurisdiction, even though, as Karim Khan pointed out, it's already settled law. So in the meantime, more and more Palestinians will suffer. Curtis, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, as you correctly pointed out, there's been a lot of intimidation from these figures, and Karim Khan will obviously face the same. Now, he's completely correct when he says that the ICC has jurisdiction, right? Of course, the ICC and the ICJ, International Court, have jurisdiction, but you can't apply international law to nations if they don't, which is really funny because Israel and the US say they have no jurisdiction, which, I mean, the US talking about international law. I mean, I think they should probably sit this one out, as they have broken almost every law imaginable, destabilizing nations, disposing of elected governments. I mean, the list is endless. You also brought up about Trump intervening and, working with other officials in Israel, trying to intimidate other figures. It's quite a dangerous, precarious position to be in. And I think that Khan is a very brave individual. Well, he's doing his job, but he's a very brave individual. Now, essentially, I mean, if you deny justice, or if you delay justice, then justice isn't really being served, is it? So it's clear that these delays are essentially a ploy to try and get out of accountability. Now, it's also very funny that Israel says, well, we don't need the ICC or the ICJ because they conduct their own investigations. So we don't need these international courts. I mean, that's just completely unhinged. I mean, investigating yourself for your own crimes, I mean, I don't see an issue there. I've even heard some of the worst arguments I've heard against the ICC and ICJ is that they are pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic because they don't want Jewish people to have a sovereign nation. I have actually heard people say that. But what these people need to remember is that the ICJ has said that Hamas leaders committed war crimes, and the ICC also wants to issue arrest warrants to them too. So they're not just picking one side here, even though, of course, Israel is the bad guy in all of this. The ICC and the ICJ are being quite balanced, and yet they're being accused of bias. There's also nothing progressive about an ethno-state either.
What's also interesting as well, when you were talking about Israel investigating itself, so this is actually a loophole in the ICC. So if this is why Israel was actually spying on the previous prosecutor, because if they can spy on her and figure out specifically what she was trying to investigate, and if they investigate themselves, technically they can say they have jurisdiction over that, and the ICC don't, because the ICC are supposed to only go after things that are not being investigated by a country that supposedly perpetrated some crime. So they're actually spying on her so they can just do fake investigations into themselves, and then they're just like, oh yeah, we're sorting this out ourselves. It's just a continued subversion of democracy, of the judiciary, of everything. And it's just an absolute shame that this is now just taking so long. How many months are we at now? May, June, July, August. We're 4 to 5 months into this now. They've had more than enough time to issue these arrest warrants, but there's obviously stuff going on in the background that I'm guessing Karim Khan just can't quite say, which is why he's come out with this like very generic message of like, oh, please hurry up, because he will have access. He will be privy to knowledge about all the petitions that are going on in the background, the politicking that's going on in the background. And I'm sure what he's doing by doing this is hinting that, by the way, this is being delayed and this needs to hurry up.
Well, I mean, it's important to note that obviously they might try and find a legal loophole for this, but it's clearly showing people that they're guilty. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to do this. Now, of course, that's when we should step in and other people need to step in and look at any loopholes that Israel can exploit. But the fact that they're doing this clearly shows that they know they're guilty. They know they're complicit in war crimes. In terms of the delay, again, I want to say that it's not... I mean, the message people will try and say is, well, there's going to be a delay because we're trying to carefully look over all the evidence. But that's not the case. I mean, we can see the evidence for ourselves. I mean, essentially, this genocide has been live streamed. It's the most covered genocide in history. And everybody knows what's going on. I mean, there was a grace period, shall I say, after after a couple of weeks to a couple of months after October 7th, where people who aren't that politically engaged would have thought, I understand why Israel had to defend itself because there was a terrorist attack. But as the months drew on, as the killing piled up, and now there's a conservative estimate of 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, people understand that what Israel's doing is completely wrong. And it's a failure of our legal systems, because even though it's absolutely right that the ICC should issue arrest warrants to Benjamin Netanyahu and other figures, and the ICJ have given a verdict saying what Israel's doing is illegal, it's still not being really enforced all that much. And this delay is part of it. There are people within these legal institutions who obviously support Israel and want to try and essentially stop Israel, and let's be honest, the West, who are complicit in all of this, from facing accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't actually include it in the news today, but it was just reported very recently that the most senior EU diplomat is wanting to sanction some of these Israeli ministers, some of the most senior ones as well. I think it's specifically Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, because of what they're doing with what they're doing to promote the settler violence in the West Bank. But I find that really interesting because, when you're talking about the genocide, you're talking about the ICJ, you're talking about the apartheid that has now been, adjudicated. Where's the sanctions for that? Where's the backlash? We haven't seen anything from it at all. Obviously, we've seen some governments maybe perhaps distance themselves a little bit, but literally the ICJ said this is apartheid. So where's the sanctions for that? It simply makes no sense. So what's going to happen if these arrest warrants actually do come through? What are we going to do then? We're going to have 3 Israeli senior leaders who have an ICC arrest warrant out for them. They can't go to about 130 countries around the world. Is that it? Does it just stop there? There's going to be nothing else? Are we actually going to get sanctions from the UK, because I don't think that's ever going to happen. And obviously we know the US, especially after, Kamala Harris's speech the other day, and obviously we know Trump, they're just going to back them to the end. So what's going to happen when these arrest warrants finally come through, which obviously we hope that they do?
Well, I just want to quickly touch upon Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. I mean, these are two awful, despicable people. I mean, Smotrich said that starving 2 million Gazans was justified. Ben-Gvir has supported cutting off aid and supplies to Palestinians. So to talk about the EU and the sanctions, it is good to see the EU calling for sanctions against some of the most horrendous people. The problem is a wider issue, right? These two people are a byproduct of Israel. You have to attack the system of apartheid and settler colonialism rather than just individualizing the issue. And that's the liberal framework, which is to be opposed to Lukid and opposed to Netanyahu and certain far-right figures, but replacing them with a more moderate set of political figures doesn't change the fact that Israel is a settler colonial state, and they will continue to treat the Palestinians the same way they've been treating them for 75 years. And it doesn't fundamentally change the structure in place, which is that Israel is a colonialist project completely backed by the West, and changing the guard will simply mean the genocide happens slower. Now, in terms of what the fallout would be in terms of the ICC issuing arrest warrants, unfortunately, not much. We've seen after 40,000 Palestinian people being killed, an estimate of 50% of them are children. We've seen schools, hospitals being bombed. We've all seen the images, right? And that hasn't swayed the UK's role in all of this. It hasn't swayed the US, who have a much bigger voice in all of this. Hasn't swayed them at all. So the idea that these arrest warrants would change much, I fear it won't. One of the positive things, though, and I don't usually praise the Labour Party. They've been pretty awful on this. But when they were elected, at least they were signalling that they would respect the ICC's decision. Now, they've flip-flopped a bunch of times on this. Not surprising, because Keir Starmer and David Lamb in the front bench are serial flip-floppers. But they did at least say, well, we may... Because they want to be the adults in the room here, right? They want to be these sort of international statespeople. And it would be very hard to do that, especially if you're attacking Rishi Sunak when he talks about the EHRC, to not then abide by the ICJ and the ICC. But the problem is, the US, will they? And I don't think they will. I mean, they've already said, as you pointed out, that the ICJ doesn't have jurisdiction over Israel. There's been pressure and intimidation on prosecutors from the ICC. So really not much will change materially. Potentially, though, the message that sends could be quite strong. Obviously, I completely support these arrest warrants being issued, and we should completely amplify this and talk about it all the time. And anyone who has a chance to be platformed in the mainstream media needs to talk about it. But in terms of policy, given how the UK and the US are completely complicit in all of this, I fear not much will change.
Well, I'm going to do something that you normally do to me and push back and say, I actually think Labour, are doing the bare minimum. When they withdrew their option to put a legal opinion against the ICC arrest warrants, they could have obviously not only withdrawn, they could have put forward their own legal opinion to either say, we think they do have jurisdiction, or we think they don't. So we know that they agree that they're not against the ICC obviously investigating, because they withdrew, but they could have joined other countries like Spain to say, no, we agree that the ICC do have a jurisdiction over this, and they didn't do that. So I think, ultimately, if this just get adjudicated on in the future that this is officially a genocide, I would be fair to say that Labour has been complicit in that, because instead of they're choosing to stand on the sidelines as opposed to stand up for the Palestinians, right? And I feel like they still could have done more at this point.
I mean, I do want to say that I agree it's the bare minimum. And when I say, to be fair to Labour, the bar is so low that I was even surprised that they even just in terms of rhetoric, I was surprised that they were even going to say, well, we may back the ICC. On policy, that's a different matter, because when it comes down to it, that's where the pressure really happens. And you and I probably would expect Labour to maybe fold on it potentially, or at the most maybe they do support the ICC, and Netanyahu is somehow pushed out of power. And I don't mean undemocratically from a foreign state, but I mean maybe people don't elect him anymore because the pressure from the international community. But as I said beforehand, doesn't really make much difference, because changing of the guard even to a more moderate person doesn't make a difference in terms of the wider picture. But yeah, no, obviously this is the utmost bare minimum from the Labour Party, and they should be doing far more. And I would say right now they absolutely are complicit in a genocide.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, we'll move on to story 2 and continue with Israel and Palestine news. The new UK Attorney General, Richard Hermer, has intervened in the Foreign Office review of weapons sales to Israel. An exclusive story from The Guardian states that Richard Hermer wants to be certain that weapons are not being used to breach international humanitarian law. Keir Starmer's most senior legal advisor has intervened in the contentious decision over whether to ban UK arms sales to Israel. The Guardian has learned as officials struggle to distinguish between offensive and defensive weapons. Sources say Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, has told Foreign Office officials he will not approve a decision to ban some weapons sales until they can say for sure which could be used to break international humanitarian law. So apparently this is the main cause of the delay, and as always, the Labour government continue to be indecisive and ineffective. As we supply very little arms to Israel, wouldn't it just be better just to say, let's just stop them all, just in the meantime, just to make sure we're not complicit in war crimes, crimes against humanity, and, genocide. And then you can go through the process later with a fine-tooth comb. It would just be so much simpler. Curtis, what are your thoughts? Because I can't tell from this whether Richard Hermer is doing this for a good reason or a bad reason, as his appointment was welcomed by many pro-Palestinians. So is he doing this to actually get more stuff banned, or to get less stuff banned, perhaps? I can't really tell.
Well, let me try and clarify for you. And I want to say that I pointed this out as soon as this was announced. When Labour said, we're going to ban arms sales to Israel, but only the offensive ones. I mean, it was so clear it was a cop-out from the beginning. I called it. I was right. I'm happy to say. Because at the time, I mean, how are you going to know the difference between the two? Netanyahu may well say, well, we promised to use these weapons for defensive purposes, only to then continue to use those weapons we sold to him and Israel to bomb children. Basically, this is a very bad thing from the Attorney General, right? And essentially what Labour are doing is that they're trying to signal that they were in favour of international law without doing it in practice, because that's a really good headline. Labour calls an arms ban to Israel, and then the fine print is, well, maybe some of them. But it's no different when politicians call for a ceasefire or a two-state solution, but continue to sell arms or refuse to put any pressure on Israel. So in terms of policy, everything stays the same. It's virtue signaling, and that's it. It's crazy to say that, right, well, even though the Labour Party said they were going to ban some weapons to Israel, because some of them may be actually defensive, we should halt that. That makes no damn sense. Any rational person would be like, right, okay, we're selling arms to Israel, and there's a chance, a small, tiny chance, that some of those are being used to commit war crimes. So the best thing to do would be to halt the sale of arms, then go through it and then go, okay, well, we found that there is no war crimes using these weapons, so resume it. Obviously, I would say don't resume it. But to kind of do the opposite and say, well, there's a chance that actually these weapons are for defensive purposes, not offensive purposes, that means we should stop it. That signals to me that this person is very happy to sell weapons to Israel and is trying to find some very strange excuse. I mean, that was an insane thing to say. I mean, David Lammy, before the election, right, he was going to release the legal advice on arms sales to Israel. He has that information now. And where is it? Nothing. So there's no point in making statements when it's not backed up by policy. Another thing which is entirely predictable. And it's strange to me that Hermer is trying to intervene to stop this ban with a justification of this. It's the completely wrong thing to do. I mean, we should ban all arms sales anyway. But this, it really makes no sense to me. And the only thing it tells me is this is not a good thing. And in terms of principle, He's absolutely fine that we sell our weapons to Israel.
Yeah, and I think it's just going to continue to happen. It just seems like it doesn't matter whether it's Israel, whether it's Gaza, Palestine, any issue. They're just constantly indecisive, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. We are talking, but the contracts that we're talking about, by the way, are only worth about £20 million, right? Like, even if we completely stop selling everything to Israel, it's not going to affect them in pretty much any way. But they get enough arms and sales off of the US, as we very well know. So it just makes sense to me just to just stop. Why don't you just stop everything, go through the process over the next few months while you stop selling these things to Israel, just to make sure you're not complicit? And that would simply make more sense to me. It just seems like, again, that they're just frozen in these decisions. I don't know why. Is it US pressure? Because we obviously know that pretty much behind most of these stories, whether it's the ICJ to the ICC to weapon sales, that we have the shadow of the US whispering in the ears of our politicians and our prime minister. So I don't understand the indecisiveness around this, when it's easier just to be like, oh, I'm not going to be complicit, let's be extra careful, right? Because Keir Starmer's the one who constantly goes on about, being careful and being mindful. I just don't get it.
This is completely pathetic. And you rightly pointed out that in terms of our arms sales to Israel, it doesn't actually make a difference in holistically. And that's actually some of the defense that people say. Well, why are you calling on an arms sale when there's only like 1% of the arms? I don't care if we sent one weapon over. If I knew that weapon was going towards a nation that is engaging in a genocide, and that is wrong. So principally, we shouldn't do it. But what's so pathetic is it wouldn't make any difference to Israel materially. They'll still be doing the same things. They won't be any less powerful. Yet they decide to do it anyway because they want to suck up to Israel. And it's really pathetic stuff. That's what it is. Now, in terms of why are people like Hermer, who you say were kind of supported by pro-Palestinian people, or seem to be quite good on this issue-ish, why is he capitulating? That's what power does. If you ask me, there are probably many people in the Labour Party, in the cabinet, who personally think what is going on in Palestine is disgraceful. That doesn't make you a good person. What makes you a good person is willing to stand up for it. I don't think that everyone in the Labour Party is a genocide monster, that they want to see the end of Palestinians. Not unlike some Israeli politicians, by the way, including Netanyahu. I think they do think what is happening is wrong, but the problem is that they don't have a spine, and they're not strong enough to stand up to power. And that's where you have these instances where you have people who may be seen as good on the issue. As soon as they get that little bit of power, there's that pushback, and they completely fold to it. Now, it's not easy, because we have entire systems that uphold imperialism, entire systems that uphold what Israel is doing. It's not easy, but you're a coward if you get into positions and you capitulate so easy. And that's kind of like what Keir Starmer is, and a whole host of things, not just when it comes to Israel-Palestine, it comes to to taxing billionaires or investing in our public services, all these things. This is a Labour Party appointing people who probably deep down believe in some good policies, but I don't particularly care if you just simply believe in good policies. I care about if you're willing to push through on it, and none of these people are. I want to say I'm sick of all these reviews and waiting to see if X breaks international law. We know that Israel is breaking international law. I mean, we have the ICJ, give its verdict. We have, again, ICC arrest warrants for Netanyahu and other figures potentially coming out. But our politicians continue to quiver. We don't need any more reviews or legal advice. What Israel is doing is committing war crimes and genocide. And any government with a speck of humanity would halt all arms sales, threaten them with sanctions, and actually hold these people to account.
Well, with the shadow of the US, that's going to be very hard, right? Because despite all of these things, let's say if all these countries who supply anything to Israel stop supplying them, whether it's Germany, whether it's us, and we finally get to that point where the rest of the world is against Israel and they want to stop them, but they still have the US behind them, I just don't think it'll be enough. The US is the one that has to, fall in line with us and with our side to actually stop what's happening, which is why I'm just very scared of what is going to happen in the future, because it's the US that we have to beat. Essentially, it's not even Israel. That they've just signed off what $20 billion worth of weapons. Just was it last week or the week before to Israel? We'll have to see. But also, as well, regarding this specific story, it was just last week that a group of humanitarians are taking the government to court about their arms sales to Israel. So maybe, I don't know how the process fully works, but maybe we'll actually finally see that legal advice that Lamy has been so, closely hiding under his shirt that you just mentioned. But we'll have to see. Okay, so if you like what we do, you can subscribe and share our content. We now have multiple people working for Turn Left. However, it is all voluntary. In order for us to dedicate more time to Turn Left, to upgrade the quality and to become a fully realized media organization and stop people like me from having all these technical issues, I can get an assistant or something. You can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 or any one-off donation at patreon.com/Turn Left Media. Let's grow a socialist media alternative to take on the establishment commentariat, to be a part of the journey we have only just begun. So, moving on to the next story. Keir Starmer is set to give a speech on Tuesday telling us all that there will be economic pain to come on top of their refusal to cut the two-child benefit cap, on top of them cutting the winter fuel allowance for many pensioners who need it. Lots of phrases have been thrown around over the last few days, like unpopular decisions and tough choices and rubbles and ruin, referring to the mess that the Tories have left them in. All the usual stuff around the carousel. But on Tuesday, the speech is being described as a direct message to the working people across Britain. He will say that the rot left behind by the Conservatives is so deep and so much worse than he had imagined, and that improvement will not happen overnight. The Prime Minister will make the extraordinary claim that those who took part in the recent riots were doing so because they knew society had been left broken and then there were not enough prison spaces. Not having enough prison spaces is about as fundamental as a failure as you can get, he will say. Those people throwing rocks, torching cars, making threats, they didn't just know the system was broken. They were betting on it. They were gaming it. They saw the cracks in our society after 14 years of populism and failure, and they exploited them. And that's what we have inherited. So Starmer is set to give the speech. Starmer is set to give the tough messages in a speech before the return of MPs to Parliament on the 2nd of September, and is setting the stage ahead of the difficult decisions and tax rises that they're probably going to announce. And here is Pat McFadden just today priming us for the speech ahead.
He's going to say the country faces major challenges and they're not going to be solved overnight. And that's a departure from some of the snake oil that's been sold to people in recent years. But we are making change.
Sources also commented to The Guardian further, stating that he will say his government has inherited not just an economic black hole, but a societal black hole, adding that this is why we have to take action and do things differently. Part of that is being honest with people about the choices that we face and how tough this will be. He will say, frankly, things will get worse before we get better. Curtis, what do you think of all this? Are we being too hard on Labour because they've just been dealt a terrible hand? Or are they mishandling this handover of power?
I think we've been too soft, actually, and I'm one of the biggest critics of the Labour Party. And I try to find goodwill where I can. I try to, say if they do something good, I'll call it out. But no, we're going too easy on them. Look, when they talk about tough decisions, we all know what that means. It means going after working class people or poor people. It's never after the rich. And I hate it when politicians say they are making tough decisions because it's always the same. Now, there's no point talking about the 14 years of Tory failure when you don't have the policies to fix it. So if you say, well, we couldn't deal with the riots effectively. Now, I'm not exactly saying we should have so many more police on the streets, but who was it that promised more police officers or more bobs on the beats? It was Jeremy Corbyn, because he didn't want austerity. So even on a social conservative policy, if you want to call it that, They can't even make promises in that way because they don't want to spend the money. Now, all these things happening when it comes to the riots, when it comes to community discohesion. Obviously, the media plays a huge role in it, but austerity is the fundamental issue. It's the fundamental issue that brings all of this and ties all of this together. But this is a Labour Party that supports austerity. And now they're saying to us people, things are going to get worse before they get better. Well, I'm sorry, but they didn't say that when they were campaigning to become the government. They were saying, okay, we can't do everything that we want because the Conservatives have destroyed the economy, but we are going to immediately try to improve people's conditions. They said they were going to freeze the energy prices before the election. And now look, energy prices are going up and Labour are doing nothing about it. And all other areas, when it comes to investment, when it comes to inequality, they're not going to do anything because they're blaming the Conservatives. Now, this is what the Tories did for 14 years. Even right up until the election that just passed, they were saying, well, you know, if the Labour Party hadn't crashed the economy or Gordon Brown sold all the gold reserves, we wouldn't be in this mess. And we're like, guys, get over it. It's been 14 years. At what point do you take responsibility? Well, this is going to happen with the Labour Party now. And I was reading an article and Keir Starmer said, maybe 10 years before we can actually start making some real changes here. So essentially, they're going to have almost as long as the Conservatives in power, and they're still going to make excuses. Now, there are so many things they can do about this. They talked about tax rises. Now, I do support capital gains tax going up, but these are sort of tinkering around the edges. Why not introduce a wealth tax like the Green Party has called for years? Why not restore the income tax, the top rate of income tax to 50%? It's at 45%. It's not even a tax rise. It's just restoring a tax cut. What about corporation tax? There are so many things we can leverage to get more income in order to pay through things. And that's, by the way, I'm even using the wrong economic framing because we actually don't need to do that. And this could be an entirely different show, but to be very brief about this, we are very lucky that we have the Bank of England. We are an economic powerhouse. We can spend pretty much almost what we like, especially when interest rates are low. I know they're not as low as they used to be back in 2015, but essentially there's no excuse to say, well, we can't spend some money to fix society's ills. Our economy isn't like a household budget like Rachel Reeves and people in the media like to say. We can just do it. Now, the reason to increase tax rises on the rich is more about equality or reducing inequality rather than actually needing that money to spend money on it. But I understand, given that most people have been taught that economics is like a household budget, I understand that a social democratic party won't start talking about modern monetary theory and all these sorts of things, which is why I was absolutely fine with John McDonnell between 2015 and 2019 saying, well, we are going to invest in public services. We are going to renationalize certain industries, but we're going to do it. We're going to pay for it by taxing the rich. In terms of policy, it's exactly the same if you want to invest and also reduce inequality. But the reasons behind it may not be correct. But I'm absolutely happy for a Labour Party to say that. Rachel Reeves has completely boxed herself in because she's done these ridiculous fiscal rules, and she's so politically she has no political nous, nor does Keir Starmer or anyone in the front bench, that they didn't realize that was going to bite them on the arse, because now they're in a situation because they're waiting for the economy to grow in order to pay for these things, and the economy isn't growing. I wonder why. They can't do the things they said they were going to do, and the things they said they were going to do were bare minimum, and they're even breaking those promises.
What frustrates me about all of this as well is that, Keir's talking about problems like, prisons. It's like, oh, it's Tory failures, the reason that we're in this situation. So what's going to be an issue further down the line now under a Labour government if they want 10 years? Like, so if we talk about the two-child cap benefit, right? If we know that people are going to be kept in poverty, what do we know about people who are kept in poverty? They're more likely to be economically inactive. They're more likely to commit crime. They're more likely to fail school. They're more likely to go to prison. So why, if you're talking about long-term planning, why are you going to keep people in poverty, right? These people should be the absolute priority. And that's why we should absolutely go after the rich and do these wealth taxes. people forget, again, during the pandemic, we all saw the headlines constantly about how much these billionaires made during the pandemic, not just from obviously just the contracts and stuff like that. We're talking about Michelle Moan. We're talking about like the actual full-blown like investors and billionaires, like Amazon, everything from Amazon to these massive companies, even Tesco, supermarkets, Sainsbury's. They were claiming, oh, we have to put up the price rises because of all these supply chain issues. Well, they've gone now, and guess what? The prices are still high, and they haven't gone back down. It makes no sense. I think I saw just last week that some CEOs' pays have doubled in the last 4 or 5 years. It's absolutely disgusting in the face of everything that we're doing. And what, does Rachel Reeves think capital flight's actually real when we know it's absolute bullshit? If any billionaires want to walk out of this country, it's going to be, what, 1 or 2 if we go after their wealth just a little bit. Capital flight is just a myth. We should absolutely go after these people. We should go after the CEOs. We should go after the shareholders and just take back some of that money that they made from us that we're paying back for decades through our taxes. And they've absolutely found their wallets. I can't even remember the actual statistic of how much money like the top 1% actually made during the pandemic period, but I can't remember it, but it was absolutely insane. And it's about time that we claw some of that back.
Well, some headlines were saying that the rich doubled their wealth during COVID, a time when a lot of us were locked down. Some people couldn't even see their own friends and family. And you had corporations, you had individual billionaires actually making more money because of all of this. And it's crazy that no serious politician wants to really look at the issues of inequality. Now, the thing is, it's a popular message to say tax the rich to pay for things. Majority of people in this country support that. All polls show that's the case. Majority of conservative voters actually support quite or fairly left-wing economic policies. So it's an easy message to sell. And we've been essentially gaslit by all the people in the Labour Party or the front bench, or the Blairites, the Starmerites, the Labour Together, the Tony Blair Institute guys say, well, we can't do these good things because you can't get elected. You can't be elected on the left-wing platform. You have to be right-wing to get elected. And obviously, since the beginning of this argument, which has been going on for decades, I've always said it's an excuse. They just don't support these left-wing policies. You'll see if they get into government. And so many people were saying, oh, no, don't worry. Keir Starmer's actually a radical socialist, or he's actually going to like support some really good left-wing policies. He's not. In fact, he sounds incredibly conservative. He sounds like David Cameron 2.0. I happen to believe, by the way, that David Cameron is to the right. Keir Starmer is to the right of David Cameron because he's adopted his economic policy whilst also being more transphobic. I mean, he's more socially conservative than the Conservative Party 15 years ago. So that's where we are now. But people support taxing the wealthy or taxing the rich in order to pay for these things, and it's very easy to sell that to public because they're open about it. But if the Labour Party don't address the material needs of everyday people, then all what's going to happen is you're going to see the rise of reform. We've seen them rise already. They're on 5 seats. They're going to get even more, and all you're doing is fueling that party. Because where does reform come from? It comes from anger with the establishment. The left tried to tap into this with Jeremy Corbyn between 2015 and 2019. Bernie Sanders tried to do the same thing in 2016. Now, I understand we are in a slightly different place than we were back then, but there was something there and people were responding to it. Now there's a complete vacuum of just centre-left social democratic policies of investment, of increased taxation, the very bare minimum. We don't have anything there. But what we do have is the Labour Party leaning into reactionary views on immigration, pandering to reform, which, by the way, isn't going to stop them from rising. It's only going to give them more oxygen and legitimise their arguments. And there is no left-wing alternative there. So I don't know whether these guys don't understand that this is what's happening, or they do and they don't care. Who knows? But one thing is for sure, when it comes to tax rises, when it comes to reducing inequality, when it comes to looking after the very poorest in society, those in control of the Labour Party are not interested. Principally, they're against these policies, and that's why they won't do it.
What's really funny as well is that, since Labour have come into power, we've now joked, but it's objectively true, that the Liberal Democrats are now obviously further left than Labour. And you mentioned Bernie Sanders. So, over the last week, if you actually look at the Democrats' new platform under Kamala Harris, the Democrats are officially now more left than the British Labour Party, which is
Yeah.
wild because for years people have joked that the left in America, if the Democrats came over to the US, most of them would probably fit very well under like David Cameron's Conservative Party, right? Now we've got Kamala Harris saying that she's going to use federal power to go after price gouging. She's going to do $5 trillion worth of taxes over 10 years to pay for stuff like child tax credits. It's wild. It's like this is what we want. Can we not have this, please? Because it's just wild now that we're at a point where the Labour Party, I can't emphasize this enough, the Labour Party are now more to the right than the US Democrats and the and the Liberal Democrats in the UK. What alternative reality are we living in?
I mean,
I can't.
In terms of the US, there's two things that's the driving force behind this. One is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders went from a nobody in 2016, and within 6 months, he nearly clinched the nomination against Hillary Clinton. Now, I still maintain to this day that the Democrats rigged that election. Now, when I say rigged the election, I don't mean they like changed votes and illegally did anything, but they did a lot of things where they briefed to the media that Bernie Sanders was an atheist, and we all know in the US religion is very important. There were rules that are brought in where you had to be a registered Democrat 6 months before a primary was happening. And in those areas, Hillary Clinton obviously did better because the traditional Democrats were more moderate, whereas there are many independents who wanted to join the Democratic Party to vote for Bernie Sanders. And in states where you could literally sign up as a Democrat there and then and get the ability to vote, people supported Bernie Sanders. So it was very rigged against him. However, I digress. Yeah. He managed to galvanize millions of people across the country. And what he did is he infiltrated the Democratic Party. Now, he's still an independent, but he essentially is a Democrat with a lot of sway. And obviously, that pressure has worked on the DNC. The second reason is unions. Now, of course, the US has had a period where unions were assaulted. I mean, when we had Margaret Thatcher, they had Ronald Reagan, they had their awful neoliberalism. But arguably, we actually probably had the worst brunt of it because Thatcher was so aggressive against unions. She wanted to destroy them forever. Whereas in the US, there still is a stronger union movement where Democratic politicians, even not particularly left-wing ones, will still say, well, I'm strong on unions. Even Republicans will say, well, I'm strong on unions. Even if they're not actually strong on unions, rhetorically, they want to be seen as that. They want to be seen as pro-worker. Whereas over here, the Labour Party actively denounce unions. I mean, you're kicking Sam Tarry out of a job because he stood on a picket line. So whereas Keir Starmer is very happy to say, fuck the unions, essentially, I want the billionaire backers, the DNC are still like, well, the unions have a lot of pressure here. So those two things have contributed to I don't want to say leftward shift, but essentially listening to the base. Because usually the Democrats laugh at the base and the GOP are scared of their base. Same as over here, the Conservatives listen to their base, unfortunately, and the Labour Party hate their own base. The DNC, we have seen a slight shift where they're willing to listen. But that's, that's neither here nor there. What matters is in power. But you're right. In terms of the policy platform from Kamala Harris is very good. Appointing Tim Walz is very good. He's a very good governor in is Michigan or Missouri? I can't remember which one it was. But
is it Minnesota? Oh my God, I've literally
Minnesota. Yeah, that's right. Minnesota.
Yeah.
And he's passing legislation such as free school meals. Again, something that Keir Starmer doesn't want to do across the country. So they're the two things that America is doing right. Lessons that we should be learning from, but Keir Starmer obviously won't listen.
Obviously, it's worth noting that we absolutely denounce their position on Israel, but in terms of comparing their domestic platform to ours, they are moving way more to the left than we are, which is just incredibly disappointed. Do we have some comments to look at? Oh, we have Shazbab becoming a YouTube member. Thank you very much. Don't remember the Nazis being allowed to investigate their war crimes. Well, obviously the way the system was set up was obviously parallel to what happened after World War II. But unfortunately, a loophole in the ICC is that if a government investigates themselves and they're transparent about it, the ICC can't actually investigate them. But Israel's doing a terrible job at that, so we get to investigate them, and hopefully they will get some justice. How are we actually going to openly admit, after months of a right to defend herself, that we can't tell the difference between offense and defense? Curtis?
It's good. It's good. I mean, that comment, that single comment, smashes the narrative there. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, look. Let's be honest. A lot of people involved in this know that a lot of these weapons are being used to commit war crimes. They just don't care. So some of them are just saying, well, they're trying to be wax lyrical. They're trying to, on rhetoric, sound good. They didn't give a fuck. They absolutely support it anyway. But yeah, that comment really smashes that narrative. I love it.
Yeah, it just really pisses me off every time. Like, if somebody wants to try and denounce Israel in any way, it's like they always have to start with, but they have a right to defend themselves. But we're kind
so
of mad
so does Palestine. So does Iran. I mean, remember that, you know, I'm not a supporter of the Iran regime. We know how awful it is over there. However, I mean, I think we should also support international law and diplomacy. Israel attacked Iran illegally, and Iran responded. Yet the media didn't say anything about Israel's attack. But when Iran responded, "Oh, Iran is attacking Israel," and all of the international community, which is essentially the big old West white community, condemned Iran for just defending their borders. And as you say, Israel has a right to defend themselves. Well, so does Iran, so does Palestine, so does every nation. But you don't have a right to blow up children unprompted. You don't have a right to genocide or ethnic cleansing. Absolutely. Which Israel thinks they do.
Stanley Becker, a shield is a defensive weapon. Everything else is defensive. Are you referring to like the Iron Dome, I guess? You think, Curtis? Is that what he's referring to?
I assume I'm thinking of the Iron Dome, yeah. That's the first thing in my head.
Yeah, like obviously, I think if the UK was supplying stuff to the Iron Dome, I wouldn't necessarily be against the UK still perhaps giving that defense if it was relying on it, because that just stops missiles. But everything else that we supply can be used.
I mean, for me, I would be like, no, fuck that. Even if it's purely for the Iron Dome defense purposes, we should not be giving a single penny to these terrorist nation. If you ask me, we shouldn't. We should be cutting diplomatic ties to them. They shouldn't be our allies. They shouldn't be our friends. I mean, I'm way more hardcore on this.
Fair enough.
No, you're maybe being a bit more strategic with it. I don't know.
Harley Johnson, the US have always been able to stop this. They should take the approach of pausing all arms sales and donations if there's any evidence risk of war crimes being committed. They don't care. They simply do not care. Part of the reason why they back Israel so much, despite like, you know, their own strategic initiatives in the Middle East, it's because they know if we investigate Israel and they get found guilty, that they're next on the list. I almost included a clip tonight of Mike Johnson, the speaker from the US, who basically said that when Karim Khan issued the application for the arrest warrants, he literally said in a press conference, "Oh, it's Israel first and it's us next," because that's what they think, because they know they've committed war crimes. That's why they don't sign up to the ICC or any of these international agreements, because they know that they would be getting sought after as well, just as Israel are. And that's why they oppose. That's why they sanctioned the previous prosecutor, and that's why they're probably going to, you know, go after this current one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But Starmer, sorry, I was reading the comment. Yeah, no, I agree. No notes.
Double D, nice size. Starmer is an establishment man. He will now toe the line set by Washington, just like Blair before him. Yeah, I agree mostly. Obviously, you know, he slightly parted ways with the US after, you know, we reported on it. I remember the episode, Curtis, where we found out that actually the UK might not be dropping its legal application to the ICC to help Israel, but we know that Keir Starmer went ahead and dropped that. So I do feel like there is some lee room, right? There is. I think when he's absolutely caught in a corner, like with the ICC, I do think Keir Starmer is going to be like, okay, nothing else we can do here. Let's give in. But it does still seem like there is a lot of support for towing the line with the US and helping Israel in any way that they can, essentially, is whatever they can try and get away with. I don't know if you agree, Kurs.
Yeah, and I'm still quite shocked about that. Again, as I'm very happy to openly shit on Labour, I will always give credit where credit is due. Again, Labour is doing the bare minimum, but I'm surprised even that Keir Starmer would do that, because Keir Starmer is an establishment hack. That's what he is, and he loves nothing more than being a bitch for power and capital, to put it lightly. And any delineation from the US is quite a shock to me that Keir Starmer's doing that. Whether it will go far enough, no, he won't. This is probably as far as he will go, to be honest. He's not going to be some sort of bastion of taking down imperial power or anything like that. But kind of be shocked that he was even, set his toe out of line against the US.
Okay, we'll do this as the last comment. Hallie Johnson: Biden stood on a picket line. Starmer fired someone from the shadow cabinet for doing the same. Insane they even keep the name Labour. I completely forgot about that story, to be honest. I remember you talking about that, Curtis, and absolutely raging about it. And it is true, Biden is actually pretty pro-union. I think obviously the story is different in the US because almost everything is completely privatized. It's like a different relationship over there between the unions, because it's not necessarily the US government paying the bill to the people who want more pay. It's the corporations and companies themselves. But still, it seems that Labour have zero support for any unions, and they've moved so far away from what they originally stood for.
Yeah, and again, that sort of brings me back to the point that the US are more pro-union, or they have a far bigger union presence, which forces politicians that wouldn't particularly be that strong on unions, wouldn't even like to stand on a picket line, forces them to do that. Joe Biden is domestically not far, a lot better than I expected. I expected him to be god awful, and actually domestically he's done a lot of good things, even with the National Relations Labour Board, where he's even the playing field when it comes to applications for starting a union. There's some good things he's done, but that's because of pressure. Politicians like Joe Biden, or any establishment politicians, don't do good things on their own goodwill. You don't get a Jeremy Corbyn all of the time. They're the sort of people, the Bernie Sanders, the Jeremy Corbyns, and other people are the sort of figures who want to do the right thing. They don't need pressure to do so. But the ones that actually get into power are typically the establishment ones, and they only do the good things with pressure. And the reason why Biden and others are happy to stand on the picket line is because of union pressure. And unions have been so watered down over here, there isn't that pressure anymore, which I hope to see change one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Bring the power of the unions back.
Everyone join the union, yeah.
Okay, now on to our last story. So, Labour Party members could be stripped of their vote for a future leader, which seems quite odd to me, as I thought the point of the parties was to create a democratic system to govern the party, its policy, its leadership. But it seems Labour are moving towards the Reform UK LTD model of dictatorship. It's been reported that MPs could be MPs could be the only members who would be allowed to elect the next party leader under plans by Keir Starmer's allies, which they are calling the Liz Truss lock. Senior members in Labour are reportedly pushing for a controversial rule change at next month's party conference, which would overhaul how the party elects its new leader, according to the Times. Senior Labour figures are keen to avoid a Liz Truss Rishi Sunak situation, so senior Labour figures believe a similar scenario should be avoided at all costs and only want MPs to have a say over who should succeed Starmer as leader. Oops, sorry, just a small technical delay. Oh, there we go. There's a plan to bring a constitutional reform to the conference that would cut out the membership for electing a leader when they're in government and only allow MPs to decide, a senior Labour source told The Times. This is seen as the last reform that needs to be... Apologies. My screen has just gone off. I seem to be having a few technical issues. Oh, here we go. This is seen as the last reform that needs doing to siphon off any threat from the left. So essentially, they're making the Labour Party less democratic. So what's the point of even having Labour membership? It's an all-time low anyway under Starmer, so why not just get rid of them altogether? What's the point in having them? Curtis, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, this is nothing new. There's been a long-ranging battle inside the Labour Party between the Democrats and the anti-Democrats. In 1973, the group Campaign for Labour Party Democracy was founded by activists who have essentially, from day one, tried to democratise the Labour Party. It's so important that Labour is democratised because you cannot democratise Britain unless you democratise the Labour Party. And I mean, it's really striking when they say stuff like, well, it's trying to stop the Liz Truss effect. They're drawing a false equivalence. What they mean by that is, well, we had Jeremy Corbyn, they had Liz Truss. What we need is to bring politics back to the sensible centre, and ordinary people shouldn't have a stake in politics anymore. And that's what it is. And that's why they want to remove power away from members and give it back to the MPs, who disproportionately have too much power as it is. So this isn't about selecting high quality candidates or picking the best leader. This is picking loyalists for, one, the Parliamentary Labour Party, and two, essentially the establishment. They want establishment friendly politicians. Now, figureheads in both the Tory and Labour Party, but specifically in the Labour Party, see politics as a game. They do not see democratic participation as a good thing. In fact, they see it as a bad thing, which is why they've tried to change rules before. Nominations from MPs, if you want to get on the ballot to run for leader, you have to get X amount of MPs in order to stand on the ballot. It was at 10%. And in 2021, they increased it to 20%. The reason being is because they didn't want another Jeremy Corbyn. The thing is, though, even though it keeps out the left when you impose anti-democratic measures, it also disproportionately affects women and people of colour. I mean, it's pretty obvious to point out that Labour, the supposedly more progressive party, has still only had white men, whereas the Conservative Party, who I would say the far more racist party, the party that pushes far more racist policies, has had Rishi Sunak, has had Theresa May, has had Margaret Thatcher, people of colour and also women in the top role. And one of the ways to counteract that is to not necessarily say, well, we should have a token minority. Let's push this particular person of color or this particular woman who aligns with our ideals. The way to do it is to open up the democratic process, and eventually you will see more people from different communities. But they absolutely hate giving power away to the members. And it's what they're doing is they're essentially drawing a false equivalent. That's why they're saying stuff like the Liz Truss effect or the Liz Truss lock, because they think that the left is exactly the same as the right. They think that Jeremy Corbyn is the left-wing version of Boris Johnson, of Liz Truss. Now, obviously, that couldn't be further from the truth because, first of all, Liz Truss has been hanging out with Steve Bannon, supporting Donald Trump, writing books about the West and the fall of civilization, essentially parroting fascist rhetoric, right? She's significantly right-wing. Jeremy Corbyn isn't that left-wing, at least as a politician and the policies he supported. I mean, it was a very basic social democratic document in 2017 and 2019. There wasn't anything radically left, yet the mainstream media and the centrist politicians think there's an equivalence here. There isn't. And to stop any kind of popular will or popular policies, and for the suits, the men in suits, the Tony Blair Institute guys and the Labour Together guys, these people want to push their own ideas and policies, but they know they're not popular, right? People don't like the policies established by Blairites. Even though John Major came up with PFI, it was Tony Blair who accelerated PFI. PFI is a disaster. It's outsourcing payments to the private sector to pay for the NHS, but in the long run, we have to pay them back, and private companies make a profit off of our healthcare, right? These are policies the majority of people don't support. But you can't get that enacted inside the Labour Party if you have a democratic process. So they're trying to push their unpopular ideas, unpopular policies, and the only way they can do it is to have loyalists and yes men, and to make sure there is zero democratic participation.
But I just want to zoom out for a second and just look at Labour under Keir, right, away from government. So we firstly have the PR vote, right? So at one of the party conferences, I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, the membership voted in favour of pushing for proportional representation. They voted yes on it, and Keir Starmer said no. then we have the election, right, where multiple NEC members, obviously famously Luke Akehurst, parachuting themselves into all these seats, and then we had other people who were close to Labour suddenly, running for all these seats, and now we have this. We have another slap in the face of the Labour membership, which is again at an all-time record low. To say your vote doesn't matter, because essentially, if they get what they want, right? If they're saying we don't want a change of leadership through the membership vote while we're still in government, if Labour happen to get past the line at the next election, that means the members won't get to vote on who the party leader is for 10 years. So essentially they're saying, oh, you don't get a vote until we're out of government. It's just ridiculous. I don't understand what has happened to the Labour Party under Keir Starmer, because again, it's just been constantly undermined. It's just been a vehicle for this establishment guy to get into power, which obviously other people along the way, like those members who parachuted themselves into seats, have used that vehicle too along the way to get into power. So what's next? What can we expect next from the Labour Party under Keir Starmer? Because he's just, I don't even recognise the party anymore. We've talked about this a million times, but if we look at the full story, I don't even know what to say anymore. I don't even know if I'd even end up near supporting them if we ever came to a point where it was a closer vote than it was at the most recent election, because what's the point? They don't represent us in any way anymore.
Well, you said that we could see a scenario where members don't get to vote on a leader for 10 years. The truth is, members will not get to decide the leader ever again, right? You think this is just a policy for when they're in government? No, it's a preface what they would do regardless of whether in government or not. Okay, the last democratic leadership election happened in 2020, and that was the election of Keir Starmer. He needs to remember that he got into his position through the same leadership rules as Jeremy Corbyn, right? That's where he got with the membership votes. The Labour Party will never, ever allow that again. They'll start by in government because they want their correct person. But if they were to somehow lose office, do you think they're going to still allow a member-led decision? No, of course they won't. So I'm telling you right now, this is members. There's no point being a member, right? Essentially, you're wasting your money, because the idea of a member, even before we had a democratic leadership election, where it was based on a electoral college vote, where MPs had a certain percentage, members had a certain percentage, and unions had a certain percentage, right? There was still a reason to join the Labour Party, because you could potentially influence your candidate, you could potentially influence conference. But on every single level, the democratic decision-making has been ripped out. And the leadership is sort of just the final curtain, right? So as you pointed out, candidate selections, a very good democratic decision-making process where you can actually get people in positions to become an MP who are actually liked, not weird robotic parachuted people, but people who are liked by their local constituency Labour Party. They are someone who served the community. They are someone who obviously wants to represent people of the area. And when you have more democratic participation, you have higher quality candidates. They've absolutely destroyed that, despite Keir Starmer saying in his leadership bid that every every candidate selection should be democratic. He lied about that. Then obviously when it comes to conference, Keir Starmer ignores all of the motions that will pass, including PR. So there's no point being in the Labour Party if you can't choose your candidate, and you can't even make a policy decision, or you can't even sway policy decisions at conference, and now you can't choose your leader. So there is zero reason why you should give your money to the party. You'd actually spend your money better elsewhere, maybe joining another party, or maybe, I don't know, donating to unions or worthwhile causes, and spend your time doing activism outside the party. There was a point in time where I argued that the left should occupy all political spaces, and that included inside the Labour Party, especially between 2015 and 2019. That was the place, obviously, where the left was its most vibrant, because that was a real vehicle for change, right? But after 2 years of Keir Starmer, you can't even apply the smallest amount of pressure inside the party. In fact, you end up getting yourself kicked out because you like to tweet. So you're actually wasting your time. And it's really funny to see John McDonnell, a guy who I really respect, who is incredibly weak when it comes to attacking Keir Starmer. I mean, he says stuff like, well, I'm going to send a strongly worded letter now. And he tweeted today saying, oh, these leadership rules are really worrying. We should change them. It's like, John, the game's over. The Labour Party are not going to change, right? You're wasting your time. The Labour Party is well and truly dead. It is dead. At least, I mean, look, I support the Green Party at the last election. I'm not a member of the party. I don't want to particularly join any party, but at least with the Green Party, they're a fully democratic one. You can join it. You can actually help shape how it looks. And the Labour Party are anathema by that. And you also talk about membership numbers, right? Membership numbers are down, but you do realize that the Labour rights see low membership figures as an achievement. They're not worried about it. That's their plan. In fact, I can't remember which figure it was. Was it... I can't remember which MP, but they said, oh, it looks like a lot of people have left the Labour Party since Jeremy Corbyn. That's a good thing. And she kind of insinuated they're all anti-Semites anyway, right? Which they weren't. They see that as consent to say, good, we don't want ordinary working people to join the party. We've got our money. Remember the last election, the Labour Party was the richest party. It had the highest amount of donors, but these donors were billionaire donors. They outspent the Tories and raised more money than the Tories from big donors. So they don't even need the money from members. Next, it'll be unions. I mean, they're trying to attack the unions as it is, but we'll get to a point where unions will have completely zero power in the party. And they will finally reshape the image of what the Labour Party wants to be, according to sort of Tony Blair, is supposedly a progressive, not union party. It's not even progressive. So they want to hollow out workers. They want to hollow out the democratic process. And they're like 95% there. So if you're a member of the Labour Party watching, honestly, just leave. You're wasting your money. Save your money. Even if you're paying £3 a month, right? You can get a pint on happy hour. That's worth it than giving any of your energy to this utterly anti-democratic, terrible, disgusting anti-worker party.
I almost said, yeah, you can get a pint at Spoons for that. And it's like, no, don't go to Spoons. Do not go there. Do not give that man any more money. But one last little thought on that is what's really frustrating is that because this is like to any outside observer, this is not a story, right? Like your average Joe isn't really going to care about this. It's people who pay really attention to politics. So what's frustrating is that probably no journalist is ever going to sit down with Keir Starmer and ask him about this because their priority is to ask questions about government, right? It's number 10, government, Israel, whatever, US, whatever it might be. No journalist is going to waste their 5 minutes asking questions about, internal party processes, really.
I do just want to say it's that, but also they're just not interested because client journalists, those in the mainstream media, think it's a good thing. They won't pull up Keir Starmer and, oh, do you not think this is a bit bad? I mean, you were elected on this platform where members could vote for you, a democratic selection, and now you're sort of reversing that. They don't care because they, in their eyes, think that's a good thing. The left is never seen as a serious political actor, not just among the Labour Party, but among the entire mainstream media. So when there is attacks on the left, the media either joins in on those attacks or they ignore it because it's not interesting to them. It's actually would be a more interesting story if the Tories did it. I'd expect more attacks if the Tories turned around and started. I mean, they don't have the most democratic selection process, but watered it down even more. I'd actually see more pushback from the media because they'll say, "Oh, look at Rishi Sunak or whoever's leading the party in the future. Oh, this sort of top-down authoritarianness, kind of like Boris Johnson when he sacked all those MPs." That's a story for them. But when it's the sort of the man who is, I mean, Starmer's the guy now. He's the establishment pick. If he does it, you won't hear anything. So the media don't care. They're probably some of them are well aware of it, but they're not interested because they secretly support it.
They do. But that's all for tonight. So thank you to everyone who tuned in. Once again, I'd like to thank Curtis for his amazing insights, as always. You can always support Turn Left by subscribing to us and sharing our content widely. Get our name out there. Tell your friends. If you like our work and you want us to become full-time, then you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month, or a one-off donation if you like at patreon.com/turnleftmedia. We'll be back on Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. if we don't have any more technical issues from my end. My name's Lewis Aaron. Thank you and see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.